In the Star Wars galaxy, there is a region no government has ever fully understood. It carries a name that has meant danger, mystery, and opportunity across thousands of years of history. No civilization mapped it completely. No fleet patrolled its full extent. Yet the forces it sheltered kept reshaping galactic history in ways the known galaxy rarely saw coming. What governments built inside those barriers determined the outcome of conflicts, the rise of empires, and the collapse of civilizations, all of it unfolding out of sight. Not because the signs were hidden, because the territory itself made sure they could not be found. Across legend sources, a consistent picture emerges of what the unknown regions actually are, who has lived inside them across millennia, and how their hidden corners kept reshaping galactic history long after the known galaxy stopped looking. We begin at the edge of the map. Chapter 1. The Edge of the Map. The Galactic Republic spent 25,000 years building the most complete map of the known galaxy ever assembled, and still, the western edge of that map remained blank. Not because no one tried to fill it in, because the territory itself refused to be mapped, defeating every expedition the most powerful government in galactic history could send. Across every generation that government existed, for the Galactic Republic, that stopping point was not a clearly marked border or a wall of enemy ships. It was something far more difficult to deal with, a stretch of space so tangled, so full of physical danger, and so resistant to standard navigation that even the most experienced pilots came back with incomplete data and damaged ships. A few found things that changed galactic history in ways no one could have predicted when they set out. That territory was the unknown regions, and despite the name, they were never empty. The book The Essential Atlas lays out the shape of the territory in clear terms. Stretching across the western galactic disk, the halo of gas and stars beyond it, and the satellite galaxies at the galaxy's edge, the unknown regions hold only about 15% of the galactic disk's total star mass, despite their enormous size. Stars out here are fewer and far more widely spaced than in the core of the outer rim, which means that moving from one inhabited system to the next requires crossing stretches of empty space that could take days or weeks in hyperspace. And that assumes the route works at all. Most routes out here did not work the way anyone expected them to. Even routes that have been traveled successfully before could become blocked on the next attempt, because the forces shaping this territory were never fully stable. A navigator who had crossed a given path a dozen times could find on the 13th attempt that the path no longer existed, without any warning and without any clear reason for the change. Explorers pushed outward from the very beginning of galactic civilization. The Alien Species reference, The Essential Guide to Alien Species, notes that large-scale exploration established the Great Travel Lanes around 25,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, and the major routes that defined settled space reached steadily outward across the generations. Every major expansion of the Republic had been made possible by navigators pushing farther along routes that extended the known map. But every lane had an end, and west of the deep core, every attempt to extend them further ran into the same obstacle. Not a fleet of warships or a diplomatic refusal from a foreign power, but something built into the fabric of space itself. Something that defeated the most experienced navigators the Republic could send, and did not improve with time or technology. That barrier west of the deep core had stopped every civilization that tried to cross it. The Galactic Atlas describes what those navigators call the hyperspace barrier in specific terms. A massive field of hyperspace disturbances sits west of the deep core, generated by the gravitational pull of nearby masses. These intersecting disturbances created interference that standard navigation could not reliably account for. A ship entering this zone found its navigation calculations thrown off immediately, its travel time stretched far beyond any estimate, and its instruments returning data that matched nothing in any existing chart. Even ships that made it through often emerged far from their intended destination. Navigation inside the barrier was not a matter of following charts. It was a continuous process of adjustment and recovery from errors that could not always be anticipated. In an environment where the consequences of a serious mistake included destruction with no possibility of rescue. Theories about the barrier's origin varied widely among scientists and historians. Some argued it was purely natural, the product of billions of years of gravitational forces building up along the western regions of the galaxy. Others pointed to much older explanations, noting that the barrier might be a leftover structure from an ancient conflict between two civilizations, called the Celestials and the Rakata, two powers whose influence on the early galaxy had left marks that scholars were still trying to fully trace thousands of years later. Whether the barrier was a natural feature or a remnant of some ancient catastrophe, the practical result was the same for any navigator trying to cross it. Normal hyperspace travel west of the deep core was nearly impossible without specific methods and enormous preparation. Getting through the barrier was only the beginning of the problem. The role-playing sourcebook, The Unknown Regions, gives the most useful description of what navigators call the Tangle, a web of hyperspace interference with no reliable lanes running through it. Ships attempting standard jumps found their routes blocked without warning, their arrival time estimates useless, and their options for returning home just as limited as their options for going forward. Even in areas that scouts had partially explored and logged in previous missions, routes were not stable from one trip to the next. What worked on one journey might be blocked or shifted on the next, because the forces generating the interference were always moving. The Tangle was not a fixed obstacle that could be mapped once and then navigated reliably. It was a living problem that demanded navigators treat every crossing as if it were the first. No map of the unknown regions was ever complete. Every chart was already out of date before the ship that carried it returned home. Getting through the barrier required what the same atlas calls trial and error, searching for gaps in the interference that shifted constantly and could not be identified from outside the zone. Some explorers used devices called S-thread boosters to push through by force, though even this carried significant risk with no guarantee of where the ship would emerge. Ships entering the unknown regions needed extra supplies, more advanced navigation equipment, and crew trained for conditions no standard manual covered. All of that preparation addressed only the problem of crossing the barrier. Once inside, new challenges began immediately. Inside the unknown regions, the dangers did not stop. They changed. The sourcebook lays out specific conditions found in certain parts of the territory. Areas near the Cathal Rift, a vast cloud formation near the galaxy's edge, were filled with small clouds of gas and scattered radiation that bounced signals in all directions, making accurate sensor readings of what lay ahead nearly impossible. Communications worked poorly or failed completely over long distances in these areas. A world hidden within the Cathal Rift could sit undiscovered for centuries because the surrounding environment scattered every signal that would normally reveal a planet's existence to a passing ship. Ships navigating this region were effectively blind to anything more than short distances ahead, making every jump a commitment made with limited information about what waited on the other side. Beyond sensor problems, the territory was packed with physical hazards that could kill a ship and crew without warning. Hidden dust clouds appeared in areas that looked empty on charts. Collapsed stars left gravity traps in positions that standard navigation would mark as clear space. Dense collections of matter not yet ignited into actual stars were nearly invisible to sensors until a ship was already too close to change course. The field guide records that navigation through many parts of the unknown regions required making short, careful jumps of 1 or 2 light years at a time, rather than the longer jumps that made travel through known space efficient, because any longer jump in the wrong direction could end a ship in one of these invisible hazards before the crew even registered the danger. This method of travel, cautious and slow, made expeditions enormously expensive in time and supplies relative to anything achievable in charted space. Some worlds were traps that kept running long after the civilizations that built them had collapsed. The Galactic Atlas documents Rakata Prime, also known as Lihan, as a world whose danger was rooted in ancient technology rather than ongoing conflict. This tropical world had once been the heart of an ancient empire called the Infinite Empire, built by the Rakata using an enormous structure known as the Starforge to project power across the early galaxy. By the era of the Republic, the Starforge was gone and the Infinite Empire long collapsed, but a device called a disruptor field continued operating in orbit, pulling vessels out of hyperspace and into the planet's gravity without warning or escape. Any ship approaching Leon without knowing what to expect could find itself dragged in and destroyed before anyone aboard understood what had happened. The wreckage of foreign vessels in orbit represented accumulated ships pulled in by the field over time, each one a record of someone who had come too close without knowing what was there. Ilum stood as one of the most carefully protected worlds in the territory. This icy planet served as the source of crystals used in Jedi lightsabers, making it sacred to the Order and closely guarded as a secret. Reaching Ilum required what the alien species reference describes as a Force-guided navigation jump, meaning that only someone with a connection to the Force could reliably find it. This restriction kept the planet effectively hidden from any military force or treasure seeker who lacked a Jedi guide, turning the Force itself into the security system that protected one of the Order's most important resources. The planet's location was not recorded in any standard navigation database. It existed only in the knowledge passed from Jedi to Jedi, making it one of the few secrets in the galaxy whose security rested entirely on the discipline of a single institution rather than on any physical barrier or military presence. These were not unusual examples. They were representative of the kind of worlds filling the unknown regions across thousands of light years that the Republic had never mapped. 3 kinds of people chose to enter this territory anyway, and none of them came back the same. The sourcebook divides them clearly. Military or government scouts worked within official structures, sent to find base locations, observe potential threats, or establish a frontier presence. Their missions were typically focused on specific goals rather than broad exploration, and they operated within supply chains that could support only a limited number of failures before the institutional will to continue ran out. Corporate scouts operated for profit, searching for raw materials, undeveloped worlds, or anything that could be sold to investors back in known space. The economics of corporate exploration meant that only discoveries of extraordinary value justified the cost of the journey, which pushed these scouts towards the most dangerous and unexplored sections of the territory where competition was lowest and potential rewards were highest. Independent scouts were freelancers operating for personal reasons, whether freedom, genuine curiosity, or simply the desire to be somewhere that no authority could reach them. They sold discoveries to whoever offered the best terms, with no fixed loyalty to any governing structure, and they often went places that official expeditions would not sanction because the risk calculations did not work at an institutional level. Credits meant nothing out here. All 3 types faced the same reality once inside the unknown regions. Standard currency was often worthless in the hidden corners. Most civilizations there had never dealt with the Republic's financial systems and had no reason to value a credit ship. The real trade goods were technology, weapons, and food. A scout arriving with functional medical equipment or weapons for trade had something people wanted to engage with. One arriving with credits was offering something that could not be eaten, used in combat, or built into anything useful. This meant that preparation for exploration in the territory required thinking entirely in terms of barter, which added another layer of planning to expeditions that were already among the most complex the galaxy could demand. Contact with new species carried carefully defined rules developed from hard experience. The field guide defines what it calls encounter levels, ranging from finding ruins where a civilization once existed all the way to bringing a member of a newly contacted species aboard a ship, which it strongly advised against because the risks of unknown biological exposure, unknown social customs, and unknown potential for harm were considered too high to accept casually. Moving through these levels required caution at every step. An encounter that seemed straightforward at the level of verbal communication could become dangerous once trade began, because trade implied ongoing contact, and ongoing contact meant exposure to risks that a brief conversation did not create. Biological differences that caused no problem at a distance could become dangerous in close quarters. Social customs that seemed harmless could carry obligations that outsiders had no way of recognizing until they had already been violated. The unknown in the unknown regions was not just a navigation problem, it was a biological and social challenge that could end a mission before it produced anything useful. Some of the most dangerous threats in the unknown regions never announced themselves at all. Creatures called line creepers, documented in the novel Survivor's Quest, added an unexpected practical danger to any ship operating in the region. These creatures, which could grow to the length of an adult chiss, burrowed into the power lines and control systems and fed on electrical current. A vessel that picked up line creepers in one system without detecting them could arrive at its next destination with critical systems damaged beyond function. They could be drawn out using salt water, which disrupted the electrical process inside their bodies, but only if the crew knew what was eating through the ship's circuits in the first place. This particular danger illustrated something basic about the unknown regions. Many of its most serious threats were not obvious. They did not announce themselves with weapons or hostile communications. They crept in quietly and revealed themselves only when the damage was already done. And then there was the deepest layer of the unknown region's history, one that predated the Republic by thousands of years. Thousands of years before the Battle of Yavin, the galaxy underwent a dark side conflict that ended with the surviving practitioners of the losing side fleeing Republic space entirely. These dark side warriors, known as the surviving lords of the 100-Year Darkness, crossed into unnamed territory beyond the Republic's borders with nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. They had been defeated in a conflict that lasted a century, stripped of everything they had built, and forced to choose between surrender and flight. They chose flight. What they found in those unnamed regions was a species called the Sith, a civilization of Force-sensitive beings whose traditions of power and domination matched the philosophy the Dark Lords had built their entire identity around. Over the following centuries, these survivors merged with the Sith people, learned from them, and taught them in return, and built a new empire in the hidden corners of the galaxy. From that empire, the dark side tradition that ended with Darth Vader and Darth Sidious would eventually emerge. Every Sith who would ever trouble the Republic, every dark side apprentice trained in secret, every plot to bring down the Jedi Order traced its origins back to that moment when a group of defeated warriors crossed into unnamed territory and found a civilization that would become their second home. The unknown regions did not just hide dangers, they created them, giving ancient enemies of the Republic a place to rebuild in secret until they were ready to return. The Republic mapped the galaxy for 25,000 years. The unknown regions were not a gap they had not yet reached. They were a gap the territory itself refused to let them close, across every generation that tried. But the territory that defeated every explorer the Republic sent had already been mastered by someone else. One civilization had built an empire inside the same barriers that destroyed every Republic expedition, and they had done it in complete silence, invisible to the most powerful government the galaxy had ever produced. Chapter 2. The Chiss Ascendancy. There was one civilization that solved the unknown regions, not partially, not by accident, but completely. While the Republic spent 25,000 years struggling to enter the territory, one person had already built an empire inside it, 28 colony worlds, thousands of star systems, and a professional military force. A functioning government with 9 ruling families and a code of conduct followed so consistently that even their enemies could predict it. They were called the Chiss, and the first thing to understand about them is that staying invisible was not an accident of geography. It was a choice, one they made deliberately, maintained across thousands of years, and enforced at every level of their civilization. The same barriers that defeated the Republic's best navigators served as the outer wall of an empire those navigators never knew existed. Their capital was buried under permanent ice. That was the point. The novel Survivor's Quest states it plainly. The surface of Scylla was covered in permanent ice, and the entire population lived underground in vast cities kept warm by energy drawn from the planet's own interior heat. This was not hardship or primitive living. The underground cities of Scylla were the administrative and cultural heart of an empire, controlling 28 colony worlds and thousands of star systems. Building a civilization of that scale on a world most other species would have abandoned as too cold and too hostile reflected the same discipline that defined every other aspect of how the Chiss operated. The planet's permanent ice cover also served a secondary purpose. It discouraged casual visitors and made the surface uninviting to anyone who had not been specifically directed to be there, adding a layer of natural concealment of a civilization that had made staying invisible the cornerstone of its foreign policy. The Ascendancy's greatest military advantage came at a cost no one was fully comfortable acknowledging. Force-sensitive children served as navigators for Ascendancy military vessels, using an ability to sense safe paths through the territory's difficult hyperspace that worked only during childhood and faded as they aged. The book references this practice in the context of how the blue-skinned people maintained navigational capability along routes that standard instruments could not reliably plot. The system worked, but it placed a specific kind of pressure on children called into military service before they were old enough to fully understand what they were doing or what it would cost them later. These young navigators were essential to operations that would have been impossible without them, which meant the Ascendancy accepted a significant ethical cost as a condition of maintaining its military capability in the most dangerous sections of its territory. The Alien Species reference, The Essential Guide to Alien Species, provides the clearest description of their physical appearance: near human in body shape, with deep blue skin, jet black hair, and eyes that glowed a steady red. Their coloring was understood to result from a chemical reaction to oxygen, though the exact process was not fully explained in any available record. What the guide emphasizes more than appearance was the character of this civilization: highly disciplined, deeply private, and unusually skilled at keeping their existence unknown to the outside galaxy. The Chiss had maintained this policy of deliberate invisibility across thousands of years. They had the capability to make contact with the Republic at many points in their shared history. They chose not to, and they maintained that choice with the same consistency they brought to everything else. Every family, every officer, every administrator understood that staying hidden was not a temporary policy, but a permanent feature of how the Ascendancy related to the wider galaxy. Breaking it required clear authorization at the highest levels, and such authorization was rarely given. Their government was not built for efficiency, it was built to survive. The administration was organized around 9 ruling families. Each family controlled specific areas of governance, and decisions at the highest level required coordination among all of them. The Schaff family, identified by yellow as its family color, appears in the same novel as a concrete example of how this structure worked in daily life. Family membership determined career paths, military assignments, and the kinds of alliances individuals could pursue, spreading power across 9 families, rather than placing it all in a single ruling body, gave the Ascendancy a stability that could absorb the fall of individual leaders without threatening the whole structure. A single ambitious figure could not remake the government in his own image because no single figure ever held the kind of concentrated authority that made such a transformation possible. The family structure was both a cultural tradition and a practical protection, one that ensured the Ascendancy's long-term commitments would outlast any individual who might be tempted to abandon them. Military service operated under the banner of the Expansionary Defense Force, designed specifically for operations along the Ascendancy's outer edges. The word defense in that name was not decorative, it described an absolute rule. Chiss law and moral tradition both treated the principle of never striking first as a hard standard, not a general preference that commanders could interpret flexibly under pressure. The Ascendancy would not attack an enemy, even one clearly building up force for an incoming assault, until that enemy had struck first inside Chiss borders. This rule applied to every level of command. Even knowing an attack was coming, even having clear proof of preparation against Chiss worlds, the rule held. Wait for the first blow, then respond. The doctrine had been maintained across centuries, not because the Chiss were unaware of its costs, but because they believed a civilization willing to strike first would eventually look no different from the aggressors it claimed to be defending against. The moral consistency of the rule was its own form of strength, communicating to every potential enemy that the Ascendancy's behavior was predictable, bounded, and not subject to revision under pressure. Their enemies had learned to use that rule against them. The practical consequences of this rule showed up constantly in the Ascendancy's dealings with its neighbors. The Vagari, documented in the novel Outbound Flight, were nomadic raiders who selected targets based on whether those targets could effectively resist them. They preyed on worlds lacking the technology and military strength to fight back, and they operated close enough to Chiss space that their activities were well documented by Ascendancy intelligence. Chiss officers could see the pattern of what the raiders were doing and the direction they were moving, but their law required waiting for the first strike before responding, which meant watching and preparing while the raiders built their strength. The Vagari understood this constraint and had developed their entire approach to warfare around the hesitation it created in disciplined opponents. Their most effective method was designed to make any response cost lives. What the same book calls the living shield system involved prisoners captured from conquered worlds, kept alive in clear containers mounted on the outer hulls of their warships, fully visible to any incoming attacker. Any weapon fired at a Vagari vessel would kill those prisoners before it reached the hull. The method was not simply brutal, it was precisely designed to create hesitation in any military culture that placed value on avoiding civilian deaths, buying the raiders the time advantage they needed in any engagement. Most civilizations would pause before firing through a line of living people, and the Vagari counted on that pause. Beyond this, the raiders fielded biological weapons and gravity-pulling devices capable of dragging ships out of hyperspace, a technology that would later be captured and put to very different uses. The Vagari were only one threat among many the Ascendancy navigated in the hidden corners. The Siruk represented a different kind of ongoing danger. Their technology centered on draining the life energy from living beings to power their ships and droids, and they had fought the Chiss before being driven back, as the alien species guide notes. Near the Cathal Rift, the Ainti monks practiced a form of force understanding unlike anything in the known galaxy, and flew ships capable of traveling instantly to any point in space, bypassing hyperspace entirely. These threats were not encountered one at a time in controlled conditions. They were part of the permanent environment that Chiss officers learned to navigate from the beginning of their careers, making the Ascendancy's military experience in the territory qualitatively different from anything forces in the known galaxy had developed. The unknown regions also housed entities that resisted standard political or military categories. Among them were the Killiks, an ancient insectoid species with a collective mind capable of drawing outsiders into its shared consciousness over time. Having lived in the hidden corners for an enormous span of recorded history, their distributed intelligence made them unlike any opponent the Ascendancy had faced in direct military terms, since defeating a Killik force meant nothing if extended contact was already absorbing the individuals who had won the battle. Scattered elsewhere across the territory were dangers documented in Ascendancy intelligence records as persistent concerns without clear solutions. Entities and conditions whose behavior could be observed without being fully understood. The hidden corners had their own economies, diplomatic traditions, and history entirely outside the Republic's awareness. The region's trade language was Manisiat, a shared spoken language used among different species throughout the territory. The same novel that documented Scylla's underground cities records this as the common communication standard across a wide range of civilians in the hidden corners. The existence of a working shared language implied centuries or even millennia of ongoing contact between these groups, conducted entirely outside Republic awareness. The Ascendancy had been a participant in this system for as long as any record showed, trading with some civilizations, fighting others, and maintaining careful awareness of all of them. Their information gathering system covering the territory was more complete than anything the Republic had ever assembled, because they had been building it across a time span the Republic had spent struggling just to enter the region at all. One specific officer in the Defense Force had analytical abilities that went far beyond finding hyperspace paths. He could read battles before they developed, he could predict how opponents would respond before they responded. His willingness to act against threats before those threats discovered the first blow put him in direct conflict with the foundational rule of Chiss military doctrine. The no first strike principle was not a preference he could quietly set aside. It was the absolute center of everything the Ascendancy stood for militarily, and acting against it carried consequences regardless of whether the logic behind the action was sound. That conflict ended his time among his own people, but before that chapter closed, a man on Coruscant was already looking west, already thinking about the hidden corners in ways no other leader in the galaxy was prepared to match. What made those years of territorial mastery so significant was not just the Empire itself, but what the territory had been hiding that even the Ascendancy had only partially understood. The most powerful ruler the galaxy had ever produced had been studying that question for years, and his answer was already shaping decisions at the highest level of galactic politics. Chapter 3: The Emperor's Secret Knowledge. The unknown regions had stopped 25,000 years of Republic exploration. No government in galactic history had been able to enter them reliably, let alone build anything inside them. And yet, one man, studying intelligence reports that no one else was permitted to read, had concluded that the territory was the most strategically important region in the galaxy. He was right, and what he found there would change the shape of galactic power for generations. Most political leaders treated the unknown regions as a frontier problem. The Emperor treated it as something entirely different, a territory that contained threats large enough to destroy the known galaxy, and that offered, to anyone who understood it well enough, the ability to build power structures that no political rival could find or dismantle. What the hidden corners offered was not just mystery, it was security through inaccessibility. And to someone whose entire method of ruling depended on controlling what others could know and reach, that was the most valuable property in the galaxy. The book The Essential Atlas confirms directly that the Emperor maintained private knowledge of the unknown regions that he did not share with the broader imperial government. That knowledge gave him a foundation for planning that no one else in the galaxy could match. The same barriers that had made the unknown regions impossible to explore for 25,000 years now served a different purpose entirely. They did not just block entry, they protected everything built inside them from any rival who might want to find and dismantle it. The territory's greatest obstacle had become the Emperor's greatest security system. Anything he built inside those barriers would be protected not by guards or fleets, but by the same navigational impossibility that had kept the hidden corners invisible to the most powerful institutions the galaxy had ever produced. No political rival could reach what they could not locate. His earliest documented interaction with the unknown regions came through a large Republic exploration mission in the final years before the Clone Wars. The novel Outbound Flight established that Darth Sidious, still operating publicly as Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, had already determined that the mission could not be allowed to succeed. His stated reasoning centered on the far outsiders, scouts from beyond the galaxy who were already probing the Republic's edges. They were the same beings who would later be known as the Yuuzhan Vong. The Sith Lord had information about these beings, understood what they represented, and calculated that an expedition blundering into them without any preparation could give them the Republic's location and bring a full invasion decades before anyone could defend against it. Whether that reasoning was his primary motivation or a convenient cover for other aims, the method he chose was arranging for the mission's destruction quietly through an agent who had his own reasons for acting. From his earliest involvement with the unknown regions, the pattern was clear: act through go-betweens, control the information, and keep others in the dark. The deeper structure of his relationship with that territory involved a Chiss officer operating under a privately arranged agreement. The book Vision of the Future suggests that the apparent exile from the Ascendancy may have been a planned cover, designed to give the officer a believable reason to enter Imperial service without revealing the true scope of his assignment. What the Sith Lord needed was someone who understood the unknown regions from the inside, who knew its civilizations, its threats, its navigational realities, and its potential. The territory was not just a strategic prize, it was a living environment full of civilizations, dangers, and forces that required someone with direct experience to navigate. Imperial commanders trained in conventional space battles would be lost in the hidden corners within weeks. This officer had spent years there. In exchange, the Chiss officer received access to Imperial resources and a position in the military structure that no non-human had ever previously held. The emperor of a regime that publicly despised non-human species had quietly placed a blue-skinned alien at the center of his most important long-term program. He did not do that out of open-mindedness, he did it because what was moving through the unknown regions concerned him enough to override everything he claimed to believe. What he built in those hidden corners was larger than anyone outside his circle was permitted to understand. As detailed in the same source, his personal files contain unknown regions intelligence gathered over years, and he used that information to direct survey teams, probe droids, and specialist scouts towards specific targets in the territory. Construction began on installations along the frontier, including listening posts and advanced stations designed to serve as the forward edge of a network that would eventually reach into territory no regular Imperial fleet had accessed. The people building these installations understood their individual assignments. None of them understood the complete picture. Assets were placed in hard-to-reach locations, specifically because the territory's natural barriers would protect them from any political rival or military faction. Mount Tannis, the Emperor's secret storehouse on the Outer Rim planet Wayland, followed the same logic. Put the most critical infrastructure where no rival can reach it. His Unknown Regions installations went even further, placing them in territory that most of the galaxy could not enter at all. After the storehouse was destroyed, the New Republic officials recovered a data card from its ruins. It was explicitly labeled with the name of something in the Unknown Regions. Leia Organa Solo and Talon Card speculated about its meaning without reaching a clear answer, because the full context had never been shared with anyone who survived him. Whatever the data card pointed towards was never located. The scale of what his Unknown Regions program accomplished made it unlike anything in the Visible Empire's history. The territory that the Chiss officer mapped, organized, and partially brought under governance covered the equivalent of 250 sectors, more than 30 times the size of the known empire. All of it built outside public knowledge, protected by the same navigational barriers that had defeated every Republic explorer. The Visible Empire, with its Star Destroyers and sector governors and public displays of military power, was only part of what the Emperor had constructed. The part that no one could see, because it was hidden inside the Unknown Regions, was larger. The threat driving all of this investment was not imagined. It was already moving. The officers who carried on after both Palpatine and Thrawn were gone believed with complete conviction that the Unknown Regions contained civilizations and forces powerful enough to destroy the known galaxy if no government prepared defenses against them. The Sith Lord had seen evidence of what was moving towards the frontier from the other direction. His entire Unknown Regions program was built around creating a defense against it, while publicly acknowledging none of it. His death at the Battle of Endor left everything he had built there without a central authority to direct it. Installations remained operational, stored data remained in place. Personnel continued following orders given by a man who was gone. The one person who had both the knowledge and the long-term plan for using all of it had prepared for exactly this kind of situation. That preparation was centered in a fortress on a world called Narawan, built to survive the deaths of both men and to eventually restart what they had started together. The earliest decision Palpatine made in the Unknown Regions did not involve installations or intelligence networks. It involved a mission of exploration that he had already decided to destroy before it crossed the barrier. Chapter 4: The Doomed Outbound Flight. Before it was ever destroyed, it was supposed to be the Republic's greatest act of exploration. 6 Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers linked around a central storage core, thousands of colonists, crew members, and Jedi Masters, and a journey beyond the galaxy's edge into territory no chart had ever covered. A Jedi Master named Joruus C'baoth had proposed it, gathered support for it, and convinced the Republic to fund it. With C'baoth himself as the primary leader and the force available to guide navigation through the hyperspace barrier, it was the most ambitious exploration project the galactic government had ever approved. The mission was called Outbound Flight. The decision to destroy it had already been made. The Republic had no idea that approval was already a death sentence. The government's backing of the project reflected something genuine about the era. The Jedi Order was at the height of its institutional confidence. The Great Travel Lanes had been extending for 25,000 years. C'baoth was one of the most forceful personalities in the Order, and his ability to gather support for an undertaking of this scale reflected both his reputation and the broader sense that the Republic's reach could and should extend further than it had. Darth Sidious had already arranged for the mission's end before it crossed the barrier. His reasoning focused on the far outsiders, scouts from beyond the galaxy who were already in the Unknown Regions, probing the frontier. These were the same beings who would later be known as the Yuuzhan Vong. The Sith Lord calculated that if the mission made contact with those scouts, It would give them the Republic's location, pushing the timeline of a full invasion decades before the galaxy could prepare any defense. The conclusion was simple. The mission had to be stopped permanently. He arranged everything through an agent operating at a distance, keeping himself removed from the outcome. The officer given the task was Commander Thrawn. His operation was carried out with the same precision that would later define decades of military service across 2 careers in 2 different militaries. Using full-spectrum jamming against the Trade Federation's command signals, the Chiss commander caused the droid starfighters to go dormant and neutralize the escort. Then his forces delivered radiation bombs into the dreadnoughts themselves. The bombs unleashed a lethal radiation wave through the interior of each ship, fast, coordinated, and overwhelming. The attack left almost no chance for organized resistance from the thousands of people aboard. The mission that had represented the Republic's most ambitious reach into the unknown was gone in the span of a single engagement. His reasoning for ordering the strike went beyond the instructions he had received. Thrawn had already made direct contact with the Far Outsider scouts and understood what they were building towards. Letting the mission continue would give those scouts the galaxy's location, and that knowledge would bring a full invasion force before any defense could be built. His willingness to kill thousands of people to prevent that outcome reflected the calculating approach that defined his entire career. Immediate deaths weighed against potential deaths on an enormous scale, with prevention always chosen over hesitation. 57 people survived. Sealed inside the central storage core when the attack hit, they were separated from the sections of the ship that absorbed the worst damage. The ruined hulk of the linked dreadnoughts eventually came to rest on a planetoid inside the Redoubt, the compact star cluster in the unknown regions that the Chiss used as a protected refuge. The survivors had no way to know what had happened in the galaxy outside. They knew the mission had been attacked and that most of their companions were dead. The full context, the Chancellor's involvement, the Chiss commander's reasoning, and the nature of the threat that had prompted everything was completely unavailable to them. What they had was each other, the remaining structure of the ship, and the need to build something livable in the wreckage. Over the years that followed, a community formed inside the hulks, built entirely on a false understanding of what had destroyed them. It developed its own governance, its own rules, and its own understanding of who was responsible for what had happened to them. That understanding was shaped entirely by what survivors could observe and deduce, rather than what had actually occurred. They blamed the Jedi. The people aboard had included multiple Jedi Masters, and in the absence of any other explanation, the survivors concluded that the Jedi presence had drawn whatever had destroyed them. Children born after the attack grew up with this belief as a central feature of their culture, passing it forward through generations who had never experienced anything else. The Jedi Order, which had been the most trusted institution in the Republic, became, in this isolated community, the source of everything that had gone wrong. While this community built its life in the Redoubt, the galaxy outside changed in ways that would have been unrecognizable from inside those hulks. The Clone Wars began and ended. The Republic became the Empire. The Emperor rose, ruled, and died at Endor. The New Republic emerged and spent years trying to stabilize a galaxy fractured by decades of conflict. None of these events reached the people living in the Dreadnought wreckage. They stayed there, hidden in a pocket of the unknown regions too difficult to reach and too unknown to search for more than 50 years. The unknown regions did not simply destroy the mission, they preserved the wreckage in a pocket of space no one could find. And inside that pocket, an entirely separate community developed with its own history, its own beliefs, and its own understanding of what had destroyed it, shaped entirely by isolation into something the known galaxy would not recognize when contact was eventually made. The Hidden Corners had taken a Republic disaster and kept it running for decades, invisible and unreachable, long after everything the mission had set out to accomplish was gone. The officer who would order the attack would eventually serve the Empire under a name the known galaxy could speak, and everything he had built in the unknown regions was still running when he died. Chapter 5: Thrawn's Hidden Empire. The unknown regions produce many things across thousands of years of hidden history. Ancient dark side survivors had used them to build the Sith Empire, Palpatine had used them to construct a defense network no political rival could locate or dismantle. What one Chiss officer built inside those same barriers was something neither of those precedents had produced: a functioning coalition government covering a territory more than 30 times the size of the known empire, built entirely through alliance rather than conquest. That officer's Chiss name was Thrawn. Imperial service would give him a shorter name, Thrawn. The first book of the Hand of Thrawn duology, Spectre of the Past, documents the circumstances of his first appearance in Imperial records, found on a deserted world just inside the unknown regions, with rumors that the Ascendancy had exiled him. His appointment to the highest rank in Imperial military service should not have been possible. The Emperor made it happen anyway. The arrangement was not a gesture of open-mindedness. It was a transaction built on shared knowledge of the unknown regions and the threats living inside them. The Sith Lord needed someone who understood the territory from the inside, who knew its civilizations, its navigational realities, and its dangers in ways that no conventionally trained Imperial commander could replicate. Documents that should have identified his species had been removed from Imperial files, part of the deliberate concealment surrounding the entire program. The full scope of what Thrawn had been doing during his years in the Hidden Corners, as detailed in the book Vision of the Future, was kept entirely off the official record. The scale of what he accomplished inside those barriers is difficult to place into perspective. The known empire at its height controlled 8 sectors of space. The territory that the Grand Admiral mapped, organized, and partially brought under governance covered the equivalent of 250 sectors, an area more than 30 times the size of the known empire, opened by one officer operating largely on his own judgment, using methods that only the unknown regions had taught him. No fleet of Star Destroyers had produced anything close to it, and no one in the known galaxy understood what he had done, because keeping it unknown was a condition of how it could be done at all. At the center of everything was a fortress designed to outlast his own death. The Hand of Thrawn, built on Naraon at the edge of where while space met the unknown regions, rose from gray hills and ravines on a world that made visitors feel unwelcome by design. Beneath the main structure, deep in chambers cut from rock, lay a cloning facility housing a duplicate growing in a 10-year cycle. His death would not end the plan, it would simply delay it. The defenses protecting the fortress were specifically designed against Force users, making it one of the most deliberately hardened installations in the unknown regions against the most likely type of threat the known galaxy's most capable agents could send. Personnel who staffed that installation after the architect's death were organized under Admiral Voss Park and Baron Soontir Fel. Together, as documented in the novel Survivor's Quest, they ran what they call the Empire of the Hand, a coalition incorporating Imperial soldiers and officers alongside Chiss military units and allied alien forces. What the unknown regions had taught through years of alliance building produced something the visible empire was never designed to be, a coalition that could function without fear as its binding force. The Empire of the Hand was not a peacetime administration. It was a military force actively engaged with threats the known galaxy had not yet encountered. Among them, Warlord Nuso Espa, a powerful alien leader whose operations had posed a serious enough threat to Imperial border worlds that the Grand Admiral had requested additional Star Destroyers from the Emperor to deal with them. The territory had made all of this possible. It had also made it invisible. Everything built inside the unknown regions, the coalition, the fortress, the cloning facility, the alliance network spanning 250 sectors, was protected by the same navigational impossibility that had kept the Hidden Corners inaccessible to the Republic across its entire history. No New Republic fleet could dismantle what no New Republic navigator could locate. The unknown regions had not simply been the location where the Grand Admiral operated. They had been the condition that made his entire program survivable. His bodyguard Rook killed him during the Battle of Bilbringi, but the structure he had left behind in the unknown regions was designed to function without him. Ships near Naraon were transmitting his full Chiss name in their communications, confirming a direct link between current activity and the original program he had designed years before his death. When Luke Skywalker and Mara Jade Skywalker entered the Hand of Thrawn, they found a fully operational installation staffed by people who genuinely believed in the mission they had been left to complete. The confrontation with the clone ended the 10-year plan before it could begin. Two individuals working together had walked into the most heavily defended installation in the unknown regions and dismantled it from within. The Empire of the Hand survived as an organization, but lost the central purpose that had given it direction. What remained was a coalition built by the Hidden Corners, now without the architect who had understood both the territory and the threat it had been designed to answer. That threat had already been moving for decades, and the known galaxy still had not seen it coming. Chapter 6: The Living Rogue Planet. On a world hidden inside the Gardaji Rift, beyond the reach of any Republic authority, organic ships grew from the planet's own living tissue, faster than anything in known space, and connected to the planetary mind that had produced them. That world was Zonama Sekat, and it did not fit into any standard category. It was not a civilization, not a military force, not a fortress. It was a living planet with its own consciousness, capable of making active decisions, capable of independent travel through hyperspace, and connected through its own biology to the deepest history of the galaxy's worst crisis. Nothing else in Legends occupied quite the same position. The Republic tried to claim it, so the planet left. The novel Rogue Planet introduces the world during the final years of the Old Republic, when it was still located in the Gardaji Rift within the Tingel Arm, a region described as far beyond the reach of Republic authority. The dust clouds of the Gardaji Rift made the system nearly impossible to locate without precise navigational information, knowledge so specific that a general search through the surrounding region would never find the right system. The world existed in a natural state of concealment, sheltered by the same kinds of sensor-blocking conditions that the unknown regions had used to hide civilizations and dangers from the Republic for millennia. This world was not simply a planet with unusual properties. The same book describes it as a unified living system covering its entire surface, a planetary mind that could perceive the situation around it, form judgments, and act on those judgments. Builder organisms called Gentari produced organic ships grown from the planet's own tissue, vessels faster than anything the Republic could build, and connected to the planetary mind in a way that made them something between a manufactured product and a living extension of the world that had grown them. Owning a ship from Zonama Sekat meant carrying a fragment of its consciousness in physical form, a connection that persisted across distance and could not be severed simply by flying away. Zonama Sekat was not native to the known galaxy at all. It was a seed from the original home world of the Yuuzhan Vong, carried across the space between galaxies in the ancient past and planted in the Tingel Arm long before the Republic existed. The living planet hiding in the unknown regions carried a direct biological connection to the civilization that would one day define the galaxy's worst crisis. It did not simply have information about the Yuuzhan Vong recorded in some archive. It carried biological memory of what they had been before they became what they were, encoded in its own planetary nature in a way that could not be deleted. It was not data, it was life. The first people to make significant contact with it left carrying a warning no one in the known galaxy was prepared to hear. The primary encounter between the world and the known galaxy came through Obi-Wan Kenobi and his student Anakin Skywalker, who came to the planet seeking the ships it produced. The philosopher Vajir was already there, having arrived by her own route earlier. She was the first to describe something deeply disturbing about the species she had already observed through the planet's connection to them. The Force knew nothing of them. Their complete absence from the Force made them invisible to standard Jedi detection, a property she had witnessed directly. This was among the earliest recorded encounters with the property that would later define the Yuuzhan Vong as a military threat, unlike anything the known galaxy had faced. It was documented not in any official Republic record, but in the account of a single philosopher on a hidden world at the edge of known space. When Republic forces arrived attempting to bring the planet under government control, the world made its choice. Enormous biological drive systems built into its core activated and moved the world out of its orbit. a planet-sized living organism jumped into hyperspace and disappeared from every chart and sensor record that had ever tracked it. Stories of a rogue planet that moved between the stars became one of the most widely repeated tales in galactic culture over the following decades, told and retold until most people stopped believing it was literally true and treated it as legend. The planetary consciousness had made a calculated decision. If the known galaxy would not leave the world alone, the world would leave the known galaxy. It spent decades hiding in the unknown regions. The people who would eventually come searching for it had no idea what they were walking into. The planet disappeared around 29 BBY and eventually settled in the class Ephemera system inside the unknown regions. Positioned within the southern edge of the Ascendancy's map territory, the rogue world remained there for decades, developing its consciousness and processing everything it had accumulated from thousands of years of experience. The same navigational barriers that made the unknown regions resistant to outside entry protected it from anyone searching for it. Without knowing where to look and how to get there, the world could simply wait. Its decision to settle inside Chiss-adjacent space was not accidental. The territory's natural defenses served the planet's purposes as effectively as they served the Ascendancy's. During the Yuuzhan Vong War, the invaders were specifically searching for it. Their connection to Zonama Sekot was biological and historical. The living world carried memory of what their civilization had been before the choices that had made them destroyers of worlds. It represented both a threat to the identity they had built across thousands of years of conquest and a possible answer to questions they had stopped allowing themselves to ask. They knew it was somewhere in the hidden corners. For years, the planet remained beyond reach, protected by the same barriers that had blocked every explorer before them. Eventually, agents located it in the class Ephemera system, and that discovery set in motion the events that would bring the war to its end. Luke Skywalker led the New Republic search, a mission that required months navigating the same hazards that had blocked exploration of the territory for millennia. The novel The Unifying Force documents that several young Jedi Knights felt a pull from the direction of the unknown regions, a sense of being called towards something in those hidden corners. This pull led some of them back towards the planet even when no official mission required it. The planetary consciousness was not simply waiting to be found, it was active, making choices about who to allow contact with and how to respond to those who found it. When contact was eventually established, the world proved willing to engage with those who approached it peacefully. What the planet offered was not a military advantage, it was something no fleet in the galaxy could have provided. Zonama Sekot carried a biological memory of the Vong's lost home world, the world they had destroyed long ago in their own ancient history. This memory could reach the Yuuzhan Vong in a way that no military defeat could, showing them a living connection to the civilization they had been before they became the force that had killed hundreds of trillions of beings. As documented in the same source, the surviving Vong were given the rogue planet as a new home in the unknown regions, a place where they could rebuild under conditions shaped by the world itself rather than by any external government or military authority. This arrangement included a long-term structure. The living world held knowledge of specific star systems in the unknown regions where the Vong population could eventually expand once they'd adapted to their new circumstances, giving the settlement a future shaped by the planetary consciousness rather than by any committee or treaty. Tahiri Vela and Tekli, Jedi who had spent time with the planet during the final stages of the conflict, chose to stay with it permanently when it returned to the unknown regions. Their decision reflected an understanding that this world's significance was not measured by any single war. It was something older and larger than any conflict the known galaxy had experienced, a presence whose history stretched back to before humanity had reached the stars, and whose future would extend beyond anything the current political map could account for. After the war ended, the planet traveled back into the hidden corners, carrying its new population of former invaders and the Jedi who had remained with it, returning to the class Ephemera system where it had spent its decades of hiding. In Legends, it is still there. Chapter 7: The Invisible Invasion. The Jedi could not see them. That is the single most important thing to understand about the Yuuzhan Vong before anything else is said about their ships, their weapons, or their numbers. The Force, which had served the Jedi Order as an intelligence tool in every conflict in recorded history, produced nothing when they reached for it and tried to find these things. Not a reduced signal, not interference, nothing. A Jedi reaching out through the Force in a room full of Yuuzhan Vong would sense an empty room. An army that does not exist in the Force cannot be located, cannot be anticipated, and cannot be read. Every tactical advantage the Jedi had built across thousands of years of service to the Republic depended on a sense that these beings simply did not register in. They'd been moving through the unknown regions for decades before the known galaxy detected a single ship. The death toll would eventually reach 365 trillion. When historians in the Legacy era counted the dead, the numbers did not fit easily into any frame of reference. Approximately 365 trillion beings, entire planetary systems reshaped or destroyed. Political structures that had stood for centuries collapsed under the weight of facing an enemy that had not experienced significant defeat in its entire history of conquest. The invasion had been coming for a long time. The galaxy had simply not been able to see it. These extragalactic invaders were not from the known galaxy. This was not a cultural label applied to an unusual civilization. They were a species from a different galaxy entirely, one they had left so long ago that their own records had lost the full story of why. The book, The Essential Atlas, describes their approach. The unknown regions provided the path their advance traveled, and the region's resistance to navigation served as a screen that hid their movements until they were ready to strike openly. The navigational barriers that had spent 25,000 years keeping the Republic out now served a purpose no Republic explorer had ever considered. They did not only block entry, they blocked visibility in both directions. While the known galaxy could not see into the unknown regions, whatever moved through those corridors could not be seen either. Not by scouts, not by sensors, and not by any Jedi reaching through the Force for a warning that never came. Their presence along the galaxy's edge had not begun with the invasion. It had begun decades earlier. The novel Outbound Flight established that scouts from the Vong had already been in the unknown regions during the final years of the Republic, searching along the frontier, mapping routes, and identifying targets. These were not the full invasion force. They were advanced elements doing the careful preparation that preceded any large-scale military campaign. The Chiss commander had encountered them directly, and his decision to destroy the Outbound Flight mission had been driven directly by the need to prevent those scouts from learning the Republic's location. He calculated that their knowledge would bring the full invasion decades before any defense could be built. His action bought time, though it came at an enormous cost in lives. The decades between his decision and the actual invasion represented a window during which the known galaxy could theoretically have prepared. It did not, because the information that would have enabled preparation was held by people who could not or would not share it with the institutions that needed it. The first documented sign of the threat had come years before the war began, and no one knew what they were looking at. The novel Dark Force Rising recorded one of the earliest observations of the invaders' most troubling property years before open conflict. Leia Organa Solo had found a mysterious individual named Nomenor deeply disturbing because he produced no presence in the Force whatsoever, appearing as a blank space where a living being should register. This observation, recorded well before anyone understood what it meant, was one of the first documented instances of the property that would later define the Vong as invisible to standard Jedi detection. They were completely absent from the Force, not reduced or diminished, but simply not there at all. The opening entry in the New Jedi Order series, Vector Prime, provides the first comprehensive account of their capabilities as the invasion began. Every tool the Vong used was biological, not partly, but entirely. Their warships were grown from living material that could absorb damage and repair itself in ways no manufactured hull could replicate. Their weapons operated through living creatures rather than mechanical systems. Their defensive capabilities relied on gravity-focusing organisms that redirected incoming fire before it reached the hull, and entire inhabited worlds could be destroyed. Creatures that functioned as living engines could pull moons out of orbit and send them into the planets below. The Cernpedal system was the first documented example, an inhabited world eliminated not through bombardment or ground assault, but through the manipulation of its own moon's orbit. Every standard military assessment of threat levels became useless in a single engagement. Fleet coordination operated through thinking organisms that linked hundreds of individual ships into a single unified force, moving and responding as one entity rather than as a collection of separate commanders making individual decisions. Combined with force absence that made every Jedi detection method unreliable, this created an opponent whose internal communications were invisible and whose tactical coordination was better than any fleet operating through standard command structures. Their use of living organisms extended to reshaping entire planetary environments ahead of the main invasion force. Creatures deployed in advance could transform a world's atmosphere, eliminating native life and replacing it with conditions suited to Vong habitation. Political manipulation ran alongside this preparation, with agents deliberately inflaming existing tensions between worlds in the Outer Rim, drawing the New Republic's attention and military resources into internal conflicts, while the invasion built strength in regions the government was not watching closely. The galaxy had been given warnings it could not fully use. The Grand Admiral had identified the threat decades before it arrived. He had destroyed an expedition to prevent the timeline from being accelerated. He had built an entire defense network in the unknown regions specifically focused on this threat. The Empire of the Hand was designed with the Vong as its primary reason for existence. His successors at the hand of Thrawn, Admiral Park and Baron Fell, believed with complete conviction, as documented in Vision of the Future, that what existed in and beyond the unknown regions would concern anyone in the core worlds who saw it clearly. The defense network, the gathered information, and the personnel who understood the threat all existed. What did not exist was any connection between that infrastructure and the New Republic's actual defense planning. The defense that should have stopped this war had already been built. It was just in the wrong place. The New Republic did not know the Empire of the Hand existed. The Imperial Remnant was too politically fragmented to coordinate with it. The Chiss Ascendancy largely stayed within its own borders during the war, managing whatever pressure reached its own territory without committing to the broader conflict, consistent with a long-standing policy of limiting military action to direct defense of its own space. Esfandia served as the only communications link capable of reaching Chiss space and installations deeper in the unknown regions. Any interruption to that connection threatened to cut off contact between the two regions entirely, creating a vulnerability in a conflict that required coordination across enormous distances to manage at all. The war that Thrawn had spent years preparing against proceeded largely without the defense network he had spent years building. What ended the war was not better awareness of the unknown regions or a coordinated defense built on those preparations. It was Zonama Sekot, a living planet that remembered the Vong's own lost history better than the Vong themselves did, providing through its biological memory something that military force could not, a reason to stop. The structural problem that had allowed the invasion to build undetected for decades was still there when the war ended. The hidden corners were still not mapped. The barriers were still intact. Whatever else moved through them was still moving, without anyone in the known galaxy being able to see it clearly. Chapter 8. What Remains Dark. The war ended. The galaxy was rebuilt. The unknown regions remained exactly what they had always been. Not a solved problem, not a mapped frontier. The barriers were intact. The Tangle still defeated standard navigation. What the known galaxy had spent 25,000 years failing to solve had not become easier to solve because a war had ended and a political map had changed. The unknown regions had never been a problem waiting for the right technology or the right government to finally crack it open. Every generation that tried had believed it was close. None of them had been right. What survived the war was not the same galaxy that had entered it. The comic series Star Wars Legacy explained that after the deaths of Palpatine and Vader at Endor, the remaining Imperial forces withdrew to an area of the Outer Rim close to unknown space, from a world called Bastion, described in the same series as perhaps the most heavily defended planet in the galaxy at that point. The Imperial Remnant organized what remained of its military and administrative capacity. The withdrawal placed them closer to the unknown regions than the center of Imperial power had ever been. Imperial resources in this region had been relatively untouched by the Vong War, leaving the remnant with manufacturing and technological capacity that governments absorbing heavier losses had lost entirely. The Pelion-class Super Star Destroyer was developed in this period, reflecting the kind of advancement that becomes possible when the industrial base survives intact. From Bastion, the Imperial remnant gradually reorganized into the Fel Empire, a restored Imperial government shaped by lessons learned in the Empire of the Hand, governing through alliance rather than conquest, spreading influence by offering aid rather than force. 7,000 years after the first Dark Lords fled into unnamed territory, the tradition they created was still producing wars. The Sith Imperial War, the eventual result of that empire's return to core galactic affairs, saw the Fel Empire, allied with a new Sith Order, successfully absorb the Galactic Alliance. This conflict and the political structure of the Fel Empire are documented within the Legends comic series and are not reflected in canon continuity. The dark side tradition those original survivors had built in the unknown regions across 7,000 years and dozens of conflicts had never fully ended. Rakata Prime continued to exist in the unknown regions, with its disruptor field still drawing ships out of hyperspace and into the gravity well of a world that had once been the center of the ancient Infinite Empire. The Rakata were gone. Their trap was still running, catching ships without anyone remaining to benefit from it. The danger left behind had outlasted the civilization that built it by thousands of years. The Chiss Ascendancy emerged from all of it with exactly what they had always had. The 28 colony worlds remained under Ascendancy administration. The 9 ruling families maintained the governance structure that had kept the blue-skinned people stable across thousands of years of unknown regions' history. The no first strike principle remained in place. The Ascendancy's approach to managing threats at its own border, rather than committing to broader galactic conflicts, had preserved its military and economic capacity in ways that governments more deeply involved in the war could not match. Border disagreements that emerged after the war, in which Chiss leadership accused Jedi of interfering in their internal frontier matters, as the Unifying Force documents showed that the Ascendancy's relationship with the known galaxy was still primarily defined on Chiss terms. They had been there before the Republic existed. They would define their own relationship to whatever came after it. Zonama Sekot remained in or near the class ephemera system following the war's end. By the era covered in the Legends comic series, approximately 130 years after the Battle of Yavin, the planet had moved still deeper into the unknown regions, away from class ephemera and further into territory that placed it beyond any mapped Chiss route. The living planet was making decisions. Its movement deeper into the hidden corners was consistent with every choice it had made since Republic forces first tried to claim it centuries before. What the Emperor had been searching for in the unknown regions was never confirmed to have been found. Mount Tannis had been found and destroyed. The Hand of Thrawn had been found, and the clone ended. The visible parts of his program had been taken apart one by one. But the full picture of what he had known, the complete understanding of what he had been working towards, and why he had considered it worth decades of Imperial resources, went with him to Endor. No one who came after him ever reconstructed it. The data card found at Tantis, labeled with something in the unknown regions that no surviving official could identify, remained an open question in the files of the New Republic. Whatever it pointed towards was never located. It is still open. The unknown regions were not a mystery being gradually solved. They were a permanent feature of the galaxy. The galaxy's charts in the Legacy era still ended at the same place they always had. The barriers that had resisted entry across the entire history of the Republic had not softened. The territory's natural defenses, the tangle, the sensor-scattering formations, the gravitational irregularities that defeated standard navigation remained as effective as they had always been. The map had more entries than it had during the Republic. The Chiss, the Hand of Thrawn, and Zonama Sekot were all documented. A dozen other civilizations and phenomena had been logged and filed away, but logging something is not the same as understanding it, and filing something away is not the same as solving it. Mithra Nuruodo had come from those hidden corners and nearly brought the New Republic to its knees with what he carried out of them. The rogue planet had spent decades inside those same borders and held the biological memory that ended the galaxy's worst war. 7,000 years before either of them existed, the surviving Dark Lords of the 100-Year Darkness had crossed into unnamed territory and built the Sith tradition that ran all the way through to Darth Vader and Darth Sidious. The Yuuzhan Vong had moved through the unknown regions for years before the known galaxy detected a single ship. In each case, the hidden corners were part of the story the known galaxy could not see clearly until it was already too late. The unknown regions produced the Empire's greatest military mind, gave the ancient Sith their first refuge after defeat, sheltered the living planet that ended the galaxy's deadliest war, and housed civilizations powerful enough to remain invisible to the Republic across its entire existence. For those drawn to the entities and phenomena explored here, the deeper look at the 50 scariest things in Star Wars covers many of the creatures and factions mentioned in this documentary in far greater detail. For those interested in the ships and vessels that define life across this galaxy, from the organic world ships of the Vong to the fortified vessels of the Chiss Defense Force, a ranking of the 20 best ships to actually live aboard in the Star Wars galaxy covers exactly that territory. In Legends, the hidden corners have never been fully solved, and whatever moves through them next is already moving without being seen.